Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle. Hey, in my series, Freemasonry and Satanism. Lordy, June 1st, 2019. Time is moving forward like a freight train. Nothing is going to stop time. What's going to happen in time? What has happened in the past? What's happening right now? Who's paying attention? Crazy questions. I've been reading this book, The Great Controversy. The Great Controversy. Unseen powers struggle for supremacy. Now, Ellen White wrote this book in 1888. Not 1988. 1888. So in 1988, it would have been 100 years ago. And 1988 was about 13 years away from 2001. And 1888 was about 25 years after 1888 was World War I. And then, of course, a few years later, World War II. And then after World War II, the United Nations created or recognized the state of Israel as a legitimate state. So it took, and there's no question about this, it's all documented, I've made videos, you can look it up. It took about 300 years for the wealthy banksters, in cahoots with secret societies like the Illuminati and Freemasonic organizations, it took them about 300 years to get where we are today. And there's been nothing but forward and upward movement towards their goal. Anybody doubt that? So my point is, does anybody think it's going to stop and back up and go back before the 300 years, where these certain peoples with the secret societies didn't have control of the planet? The answer, of course, is whatever they have planned, and as they have said, they can either accomplish it through peaceful means or vicious aggression and war and death and suffering and destruction. Either or. It's been quoted by numerous of these elites. You can look it up. So the Great Controversy, 1888, republished again in 1907, again in 1911, and again in 1939, and again in 1950. This particular book was 1990. The back of the book. We are living in the most solemn period of this world's history. The destiny of Earth's teeming multitudes is about to be decided. Events of vital importance are taking place around us. The event so long doubted and disbelieved is soon to be approaching. Will the church and state one day unite? What role does our nation play in biblical prophecies? What is the mark of the beast mentioned in Revelation that we are to avoid? Who is the beast? The book you now hold in your hands will answer these questions clearly with divine authority. Are you prepared for what lies between these pages? It is Satan's constant effort to misrepresent the character of God, the nature of sin, and the real issues at stake in the Great Controversy. So, the big question is, which probably puts most people in a state of disbelief, is there a spiritual world? Is there a cosmic battle? Are there any signs and symbols to tell us what's really happening? I say there is, and I've quoted them many times. the United Nations, in their charter, I went over this recently, says that they recognize the ability to contact disembodied spirits, people behind the veil in the other world, heaven or hell. United Nations Charter. So it would be an occult thing, a Kabbalah thing, a spiritual thing, and I guess if it's evil forces bent on world domination, a satanic thing. So what is the history of planet Earth? Well, I think most people will acknowledge that there was a great flood, maybe plus or minus 10,000 years ago. And apparently, people were warned about that great flood. Even the Hopi Indians in America acknowledge that some assistance and direction came to them and helped them build underground facilities or in the mountains to survive the great flood. In Romania they have tunnels. In Ecuador they have huge, vast tunnels in the mountains all the way down. So all over the world there appears to be native indigenous peoples telling the same story. And then of course in the Bible, God told Noah to build the ark and get 2 of every creature and his family because the flood was coming. So prior to the great flood, there was a civilization. I think most people acknowledge that. The monuments are all over the planet. And then they talk about Hyperborea up there north of Germany, and Mu or Mao, whatever, out there in the Pacific, and Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean, and other ancient civilizations and stories. In the Philippines, the evidence is all over the Philippines. Those thousands upon thousands of islands with the ancient buildings. In South America, Africa, again, I don't think anybody can deny this. The whole European and Asian continent, America, the old Indian mounds. Apparently, at one point way back in history, they were mining copper or tin or whatever up in the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan. And they had these tribes of people all the way down the Mississippi River bringing that mined metal to the Gulf and then shipping it by boat across the Gulf to the Yucatan. And somebody was orchestrating all this. And there are mounds all along the Mississippi, and evidence of this. Many people have written books about that. You can go look it up on Yahoo image site. So anyways, there used to be a huge civilization before this one. Most people will probably agree with that. Apparently there were some divine or well-informed entities, forces, that wanted a remnant of mankind to survive. And we did. And here we are today, advanced again. And it also seems divine intervention about 100 plus years ago, not that long ago, when we got TV and radio. I mean, everything's been on an extreme tangent growth curve in the last 100, 110, 20 years. I mean, 120 years ago, Henry Ford, the Model T, maybe not even that long ago. And radio, TV was coming about, transistors, vacuum tubes instead of transistors, and now we got microchips, and now we even maybe have biological computers and stuff like that. And all kinds of changes in the 1800s concerning religion that were seriously focused on communicating with otherworld spirits, psychic abilities, Kabbalah, witchcraft. And it was an anti-Christian effort, and the elites were involved, including the governments. I've got several book reviews I've done on Tim Rifat, David Morehouse, Jim Mars, about remote viewing and the government involvement. And then you have Montauk, Project Montauk at the end of Long Island, They were abducting young boys from New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and experimenting on them. Apparently opening up some kind of portals and putting the boys into the portals. Some say it's a time machine. And some of the boys wandered back into the portal, and they would ask them what they saw on the other side. But generally speaking, the boys never returned. Who knows where they went? Look into that stuff. Jacob's Ladder, Philadelphia Experiment, Mandela Effect, and on and on and on. And CERN, the collider, involving elites from all over the world doing some strange things and having some strange reports come out up there. So again, it boggles the mind. And what does it have to do with this book? I suspect everything. And if you pay attention to this book review, at the end of it, you're going to get a surprise. I discovered something quite bizarre. And actually, quite real. Maybe you know about it, maybe you knew about it. So anyways, I'm looking at the contents. Now, 1888, Ellen White wrote this book, and she spent many years researching this kinds of information. Throughout history, even recent history, the last 100, 200 years, there were people who recognized who the culprits were, who brought us the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, World War I, World War II, the execution of the King of Britain, the execution of the King of France, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Britain and France and all over Europe, and a huge migration in the 1500s and 1600s of those Jews into Poland and the Ukraine, bringing with it a whole lot of trouble for the Russian Empire, and they had to deal with it. Russian Empire was a Christian nation. Germany was a Christian nation. Britain was a Christian nation. America was a Christian nation. South America, all over the world. And somebody's trying to turn that around for the better or for the worse. I say absolutely for the worse. And again, the symbols are everywhere. A simple example, the United Nations appears to have an occult meditation room and acknowledge the communication with disembodied spirits, people who died. And they sponsored and paid for and accomplished putting up 1,000 archways, doorways, with symbols on them, magic symbols, occult symbols, to Baal, B-A-A-L, mentioned in the Bible. So you have this demonic entity or entities in cahoots with the people who are trying to bring us a global world order, and they're installing all over the world mechanisms, computers, and facial recognition and monitoring systems and everything, even attack system, microwave systems, and apparently destroying our environment so we can't survive with the dumping of chemicals in the sky. Somebody's desiring to bring about a crazy catastrophe to the planet, which is prophesied in the Islamic people's religion, in the Christian people's religion. So the contents here says the destruction of Jerusalem, the persecution in the first centuries, the era of spiritual darkness, the Waldenese, Jane Wycliffe, Huss and Jerome, Luther's separation from Rome, Luther before the Diet, the Swiss Reformer, progress of reform in Germany, protest of the princes, the French Revolution, the French Reformation, the Netherlands and Scandinavia, later English reformers, the Bible and the French Revolution, the Pilgrim Fathers, Heralds of the Morning, the American Reformer, Light Through Darkness, and the Great Religious Awakening. And it doesn't stop there. A warning rejected, prophecies fulfilled. What is the sanctuary? In the Holy of Holies, God's law immutable. a work of reform, modern revivals facing life's record, the origin of evil, enmity between man and Satan, agency of evil spirits, snares of Satan, the first great deception, can our dead speak to us, spiritualism, liberty of conscience threatened, aims of the papacy, the impending conflict, the scriptures a safeguard, a final warning, the times of trouble, God's people delivered, desolation on earth, the controversy ended. Oh my. So I'm going to read, believe it or not, 3 pages. And then I have a couple little snippets to show you something that just might disturb you, might alarm you, if you're awake. The destruction of Jerusalem. If thou had known, even thou, at least in this thy day, the things which belong unto thy peace. But now they are hid from thy eyes. For the days shall come upon thee, that thy enemies shall cast a trench about thee, and compass thee round, and keep thee on every side, and shall lay thee even with the ground, and thy children within thee, and they shall not leave thee one stone upon another, because thou knewest not the time of thy visitation. And that's in Luke 19:42 to 44. So there's a promise of a destruction coming. From the crest of Olivet, that's a mountain over there near Jerusalem, King Solomon's temple, Jesus looked upon Jerusalem. Fair and peaceful was the scene spread out before him. It was the season of Passover, and from all lands the children of Jacob had gathered there to celebrate the great national festival. In the midst of the gardens and the vineyards and the green slopes studded with pilgrims' tents rose the terraced hills, the stately palaces, and the massive bulwarks of Israel's capital. The daughter of Zion seemed in her pride to say, I sit a queen and shall see no sorrow. As lovely then, and deeming herself as secure in heaven's favor, as when ages before the royal minstrel sang, beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth. Is Mount Zion, the city of the great king. Psalms 42:2. In full view were the magnificent buildings of the temple. The rays of the setting sun lighted up the snowy whiteness of its marbled walls and gleamed from golden gate and tower and pinnacle, the perfection of beauty. It stood the pride of the Jewish nation. What child of Israel could gaze upon the scene without a thrill of joy and admiration? So this is Jesus standing on top of a mountain, Olivet, looking at Jerusalem and the temple. But far other thoughts occupied the mind of Jesus. When he was come near, he beheld the city and wept over it. Luke 19:41. Amid the universal rejoicing of the triumphal entry, white palm branches waved, while glad hosannas awoke the echoes of the hills, and thousands of voices declared him king. The world's Redeemer was overwhelmed with a sudden and mysterious sorrow. He, the Son of God, the promised one of Israel, whose power had conquered death and called its captives from the grave, was in tears, not of ordinary grief, but of intense, irrepressible agony. Why was Jesus looking at the city in grief and agony? His tears were not for himself, though he well knew whether his feet were tending. But before him lay Gethsemane, the scene of his approaching agony. Gethsemane, the scene of his approaching agony. The sheep gate also was in sight, through which for centuries the victims for sacrifice had been led through. Which for centuries the victims for sacrifice had been led through. So they were leading the sheep and the animals through the gate to perform these sacrifices, which was open to him when he should be brought as a lamb for the slaughter. Isaiah 53:7. Not far away was Calvary, the place of the crucifixion. So another hill, Calvary, is where they crucified Jesus. Upon the path which Christ was soon to tread must fall the horror and the great darkness, as he should make his soul an offering for sin. Yet it was not the contemplation of these scenes that cast a shadow upon him in his hour of gladness, in this hour of gladness, no foreboding or his own superhuman anguish clouded that unselfish spirit. He wept for the doomed thousands of Jerusalem because of the blindness and impotence of those whom he came to bless and save. The history of more than 1,000 years of God's special favor and guardian care manifested to the chosen people was open to the eye of Jesus. There was Mount Moriah, where the Son of Promise, an unresisting victim, had been bound to the altar, emblem of the offering of the Son of God. There the covenant of blessing, the glorious messianic promise, 22.9 Genesis, 16 through 18 Genesis. There the flames of the sacrifice ascended to heaven from the threshing floor of Ornan, had turned aside the sword of the destroying angel. So apparently they made these sacrifices of the sheep and other cattle, and maybe chickens or whatever else, to turn aside the sword of the destroying angel. That's 1 Chronicles 21. Fitting symbols of the Savior's sacrifice and meditation for guilty men. Jerusalem had been honored of God above all the earth. The Lord had chosen Zion. He had desired it for his habitation. Psalms 132.13. That's quite the story. There for ages, holy prophets had uttered their messages of warning. So there were prophets, people who were communicating with the divine world, giving Jerusalem, Israel, warnings. Their priests had waved their censers, and the cloud of incense, with the prayers of the worshippers, had ascended before God. There daily the blood of slain lambs had been offered, pointing forward to the Lamb of God. There Jehovah had revealed his presence in a cloud of glory above the mercy seat. There rested the base of that mystic ladder connecting earth with the heaven. Genesis 28.12, John 1.51. The ladder upon which angels of God descended and ascended, and which opened to the world the way to the holiest of all. Had Israel as a nation preserved her allegiance to heaven, Jerusalem would have stood forever, the elect of God, Jeremiah 17:21-25. But the history of that favored people was a record of backsliding and rebellion. They had resisted heaven's grace and abused their privileges and slighted their opportunities. So the presence of the cloud of glory above the mercy seat. So it was the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat. And apparently when they sacrificed a sheep or lamb, whatever, burning it, some entity in the form of a cloud would come to the temple courtyard and hover there. And apparently, in some instances, would speak like, "I am your God," and give them laws and directions. The cloud of glory. So I did go on Yahoo image site, and I looked up cloud of glory, and I made a short clip. So let me play that right now. Hello and welcome to another Yahoo image word search. A little review of some pictures about the Cloud of Glory Tabernacle. I've been reading the book The Great Controversy by Ellen White. Unseen Powers Struggle for Supremacy. And it mentions that there was no cloud of glory was seen to fill the newly erected sanctuary, King Solomon's Temple number 2. The first one was built 300 years ago, approximately, and it was destroyed 500 years later. And then 500 years after that, or some years after that, the second temple was built and later destroyed. But the second temple, apparently according to Ellen White's book, The Great Controversy, the cloud of glory did not appear. So I was just curious what the cloud of glory might look like. So I did the Yahoo image search. You can do this. And remember, recently they consecrated an altar at the site of King Solomon's temple, sacrificing a lamb, I guess getting it ready for when they do rebuild King Solomon's temple to continue or to start again sacrificing animals so that they can make this happen, this cloud of glory to appear. It's almost right out of a movie, an Indiana Jones movie. The Cloud of Glory Tabernacle. So what do you think? Should they rebuild King Solomon's temple? Looks like they're leading some birds here, some cows, a lamb. It looks like sheep, maybe. Sheep in front of the cows. I guess when they do these sacrifices, they sacrifice quite a few animals so they can bring this cloud of glory, this entity, this divine presence, almost like a Ghostbusters movie, if you've ever seen that, where the entity comes down from the sky. Now on the day that the tabernacle was raised up, the cloud covered the tabernacle, the tent of the testimony. From evening until morning, it was above the tabernacle like the appearance of fire. So I ask people, should we destroy Christianity? Which is what the powers that be are trying to do, and are pursuing a global world order, a one world religion, a one world currency, a one world government, and begin these religious practices again so they can bring in this being, the tabernacle with God's Shekinah glory. The tabernacle, or Minshka, means tent of meeting. It represents the Shakahin, the indwelling presence of God. God's glory filled the tabernacle. A cloud covered it by day and a fire by night. So it's a cloud during the day and a fire by night. in the Bible. Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and a glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Exodus 40-34. Did you know this? Apparently the Sanhedrin, the religious authorities of Israel today and the Jewish people worldwide, were calling on President Putin of Russia's support, President Donald Trump of American support, and leaders from all over the world's support to rebuild King Solomon's temple. And remember, the Arab, Muslims, Islamic religion, one of their holy sites or symbols, buildings, the Dome of the Rock, sits where they want to rebuild King Solomon's temple. Wow, here's an interesting picture. So before they sacrifice the animals, they have this huge brass basin full of water. So I guess the animals have to go in there to be washed, however they do it. And then the sacrifice over here to the right, up the steps, they're bringing the animals so that the cloud of glory can appear, looking different ways: fire by night and a cloud during the day. Fire by night and a cloud during the day. Oh my. Being respectful as I am, I certainly wouldn't want to ridicule any kind of divine entity. I think that would be foolish. If you're going to study this stuff, remain humble. But I don't believe it's the teaching of Christianity. Christ was prophesied to come. The presence of God showed up in the flesh. The Hebrews back then rejected him, crucified him. He rose from the dead. So he died for our sins. We don't have to do sacrifices like they did in the past. But they want to bring that back. And they continue to reject Jesus Christ. And they want the rest of the world to reject Jesus Christ. Personally, I don't think that's a good idea. Above the mercy seat was the Shekinah glory, the manifestation of the divine presence. And from the cherubim, God made known his will. Divine message were sometimes communicated to the high priest by a voice from the cloud. Sometimes a light fell upon the angel at the right to signify approval or acceptance, or a shadow or cloud rested upon the one at the left to reveal disapproval or rejection. Interesting. So on the Ark of the Covenant are the two cherubim, I guess angels, and if the cloud falls upon the one to the right, you have God's approval. If the cloud hovers over the one to the left, you have the divine God's disapproval or rejection. Oh my! Lightning from heaven, cloud of glory, fire from heaven, King Solomon's temple, prophecy. Thanks for watching my short video clip from Yahoo image sites. You can go on this Yahoo image site, plug in these words or any other words, topics you're interested in, and the pictures say volumes, in my opinion. Rick Marico reporting. So there you have it. This cloud of glory shows up when they perform these sacrifices. And this will be the third time they rebuild King Solomon's temple. They're moving forward. This is 2019. And there's all kinds of evidence that that's going to be the case. They even had a sacrifice on the new altar that will be in the temple, I believe in December. You can go look up and see the videos. So apparently when they do sacrifice the lamb, the sheep, the cow, whatever, the birds, and they get the blood and they do their rituals, if they do it successfully, this being will arrive in a cloud. And they were expecting, when Jesus arrived, a Messiah that would help them conquer their enemies and control the world. Instead, they got the Messiah who was preaching that we should love one another. Back to the story in the book. Although Israel had mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets. So Jesus accused the Jews back then, the Hebrews, ye are the killers of your prophets. So the spiritual world kept sending these prophets trying to warn the people. And they kept killing them. And then the ultimate prophet, God's son, if you will, the Messiah, was sent in a final plea to wake them up. They crucified him. People believe that. And the teachings of Jesus, and that was the creation of Christianity. And it was spreading like wildfire all over the Middle East and parts of the world. Rome was trying to extinguish the rising of Christianity, executing them. But they were fighting a losing battle. So Rome embraced Christianity, took control of it, and started killing people who wouldn't convert to Christianity. How crazy is that? Chronicles 36:16. He had still manifested himself to them as the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth. Exodus 34:6. Notwithstanding repeated rejections, his mercy had continued its pleadings. With more than a father's pitying love for the son of his care, God had sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion of his people, on his dwelling place. Chronicles 2:36-15. When remonstrance, entreaty, and rebuke had failed, he sent to them the best gift of heaven. Nay, he poured out all heaven in one gift. So he kept sending the prophets. They kept killing the prophets. So finally he sends the best gift, his very son. The Son of God himself was sent to plead with the impudent city. It was Christ that had brought Israel as a goodly vine out of Egypt. So in the spirit being, got bugs chasing me here, it was the Christ spirit, I guess, in Moses or with Moses, however that stuff works, that had brought the Hebrews out of Egypt. And the spirit world kept sending prophets, and apparently the Christ being in Jesus was sent again. It's the only bad problem with doing videos outside. You got little bugs that want to take a bite of you. Psalms 80:8. His own hand had cast out the heathen before it. He had planted it in a very faithful, fruitful hill. His guardian care had pledged about it. His servants had been sent to nurture it. What could have been done more to my vineyard? That would have been God's vineyard. He exclaims that I have not done in it. Isaiah 5:1.4. Though when he looked at it, should bring forth grapes, it brought forth wild grapes. Yet while with a still yearning hope of fruitfulness, he came in person to his vineyard, if happily it might be saved from destruction. He digged about his vine, he pruned and cherished it, He was wearied in his efforts to save this vine of his own planting. So, God sending his son, or himself as his son, and think of Israel as his vineyard, he was trying to save it. So, Jesus didn't start preaching until he was 30, and he was crucified at 33. So did Jesus become possessed by this spiritual entity, God, if you will? So anyways, when he did become possessed or knowledgeable or began his teaching, for 3 years the Lord of light and glory had gone in and out among his people. He went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil. So they talk about that there was a devil back then. And they performed the sacrifices at the temple site to ward off the angel of destruction, the angel of the sword. Just interesting things to know. And I don't think the reality of humanity has changed. I don't think God died, and I don't think that evil disappeared or doesn't exist. So when you're reading stuff like this, you have to use your brain and some discernment and try to see what it really means. At least I do. Binding up the brokenhearted, setting at liberty them that were bound, restoring sight to the blind, causing the lame to walk, and the deaf to hear, cleansing the lepers, raising the dead, and preaching the gospel to the poor. Acts 10.38, Luke 4.18, Matthew 11.45. To all classes alike was addressed the gracious call, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11.28. Though rewarded with evil for good and hatred for his love. So for all that good and love that Jesus was giving, he was rewarded with evil and hate. He had steadfastly pursued his mission of mercy. Never were those repelled that sought his grace. A homeless wanderer, reproach and penury, his daily lot, he lived to minister to the needs and lighten the woes of men, to plead with them to accept the gift of life. The waves of mercy, beaten back by those stubborn hearts, returned in a stronger tide of pitying, inexpressible love. But Israel had turned from her best friend and only helper. The pleadings of his love had been despised, his counsels spurned, his warnings ridiculed. The hour of hope and pardon was fast passing. The cup of God's long-deferred wrath was almost full. The cloud that had been gathering through ages of apostasy and rebellion now... Oh, that was a strange-looking little bug. Looked like a little spider. Now black with woe, was about to burst upon a guilty people. He who alone could save them from their impending fate had been slighted, abused, rejected, and was soon to be crucified. When Christ should hang upon the cross at Calvary, Israel's day as a nation favored and blessed by God would be ended. The loss of even one soul is a calamity infinitely outweighing the gains and treasures of a world. But as Christ looked upon Jerusalem, the doom of the whole city, a whole nation was before him. That city, that nation, which had once been the chosen of God, his particular treasure. Prophets had wept over the apostasy of Israel, the terrible desolations by which their sins were visited. Jeremiah wished that his eyes were a fountain of tears, that he might weep day and night for the slain of the daughter of his people, for the Lord's flock that was carried away captive. Jeremiah 9.1, 13.17. What then was the grief of him whose prophetic glance took in? Not years, but ages. He beheld the destroying angel, with sword uplifted against the city, which had so long been Jehovah's dwelling place. And I made a book review, I think 2, on Jeremiah, the Old Testament. And 500 years after the first temple was built, apparently God sent Nebuchadnezzar down from Babylon to destroy the city. You can go watch my video. Because they were sacrificing their sons and daughters to the demon god Baal Moloch. So apparently King Solomon's temple was destroyed twice for this. And so where does that lead us today? He beheld the destroying angel, whose sword uplifting against the city, which had so long been Jehovah's dwelling place. So 500 years after the temple was built, it was destroyed by God, apparently. And then after they were in captive in Babylon for a while, King Cyrus rescued the people. You know, kings die, new kings come along, and things change. People forget. And he helped them rebuild King Solomon's temple number 2. And then 500 years later, it was destroyed again for the same reasons, the arrogance towards God. And interestingly enough, so it was the first one existed for about 500 years. The second one existed for about 500 years. And between the second one being destroyed when crucified, after Jesus was crucified, I think it was 70 years after. That's been 2,000 years. Now they want to rebuild it 2,000 years later. Will there be a strike 3? Is this part of the fulfillment of the prophecy, what's going to happen? From the ridge of Olivet, the very spot afterward occupied by Titus and his army, and that would have been Titus from Rome and his army who destroyed the second temple. Viewing it from the same mountain that Jesus looked upon it. He looked across the valley upon the sacred courts and porticos. With a tear-dimmed eyes, he saw an awful perspective. The walls surrounded by alien host. He heard the tread of armies marshaling for war. He heard the voice of mothers and children crying for bread in the besieged city. He saw her holy and beautiful house, her palaces and towers given to the flames, where once there stood only a heap of smoldering ruins. Looking down the ages, he saw the covenant people scattered to every land. That would have been the diaspora. Like wrecks on a desert shore. In the temporal retribution about to fall upon her children, he saw but the first draught from the cup of wrath, which at the final judgment she must drain to its dregs. Divine pity, yearning love, found utterance in the mournful words. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as the hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Got some people yelling. All right, continuing on. Looking down the ages, he saw the covenant people scattered in every land, like wrecks on a desert shore. In the temporal retribution about to fall upon her children, he saw but the final draught from the cup of wrath, which at the final judgment she must drain to its dregs. Divine pity, yearning love, found utterances in the mournful words. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. O that thou, a nation favored above every other, hast known the time of thy visitation, the things that belong unto thy peace. I have stayed the angels of justice. I have called thee to repentance, but in vain. It is not merely servants, delegates, and prophets, whom thou hast refused and rejected, but the Holy One of Israel, the Redeemer. That would be Jesus. If thou art destroyed, thou alone art responsible. Ye will not come to me that ye might have life. Matthew 23:37, John 5:40. Christ saw in Jerusalem a symbol of a world, get this, of a world hardened in unbelief and rebellion, and hastened on to meet the retribution judgments of God. The woes of the fallen race pressing upon his soul, forced from his lips that exceedingly bitter cry. He saw the record of sin traced in human misery, tears and blood. His heart was moved with the infinite pity for the afflicted and suffering ones on earth. He yearned to relieve them all, but even his hand might not turn back the tide of human woe. Few would seek their only source of hope. He was willing to pour out his soul unto death, to bring salvation within their reach, but few would come to him that they might have life. The majesty of heaven in tears, the Son of the infinite God troubled in spirit, bowed down with anguish. The scene filled all heaven with wonder. That scene reveals to us the exceedingly sinfulness of sin. It shows how hard a task it is, even for the infinite power, to save the guilty from the consequences of transgressing the law of God. Jesus, looking down to the last generation, saw the world involved in a similar destruction of that which caused the destruction of Jerusalem. So a lot of people, if you've been watching videos on YouTube and doing any research at all, or paying any attention to the realities going on today, even President Donald Trump sending an aircraft carrier and a fleet of ships to intimidate Iran, and a fleet of bombers to the neighboring air bases around Iran. And even that one speaker, a video I was watching, saying, we don't start wars. What we do is we push people really hard and punch them until they fight back. Then we say they started it and we have a war. You can go watch these people speak about this stuff. Mr. Bolton and so many others. It just makes me wonder, when will it start? When will there be something like a big event that brought us World War I or World War II or 9/11 and so much more? So in this particular case, 2,000 years after the last temple and the rebuilding of it now, it's a worldwide situation. And luckily for people who believe in Jesus, and again, I'm not trying to be a religious preacher or teacher. I was trying to figure out when I began this investigation, WTH, what the heck is going on in our reality? I mean, 9/11 and so much more. People losing their homes in Canada, Germany, Argentina, United States, Florida, as a educated man, I said, it can't just be a coincidence of all these situations. 2008 stock market collapse. So I began my research, and I have discovered that none of it has been coincidences. There has been a 300-year plan to get us to where we are today. And I believe it has everything to do with what's written in these pages and a lot of other books I've been going over. There are evil forces that want to defy God himself. And remember, we're human beings. We die. When we leave this planet, we go into another realm. We're spiritual beings, I believe. But social conditioning has a lot of people convinced that's not the case. So what do you do with people who are just going to throw themselves into Hades or hell, whatever? You can fight and say, hey, say no to evil. They teach people to say no to drugs and now they teach people to say no to Christianity. Say no to family values. And say yes to everybody looking like freaks. What kind of evil force is behind that? Anyways, I ramble on. Let me get back to the book. The great sin of the Jews was their rejection of Christ. The great sin of the Christian world would be their rejection of the law of God, the foundation of his government in heaven and earth. So yet again I ask, even when Satan took Jesus to the top of the mountain, this is in the Bible. Again, I'm not a Bible scholar and I've never been a preacher. I can see what's going on in the world right now. I can see all the destruction going on in Palestine. I can see that in Honduras, in the news today, they're burning the American embassy. In Honduras. In Venezuela, they're ready to invade that. So I can see all this stuff going on. I can see the peoples in my city when I go downtown. The demonic tattoos and everything else. And it pains me. I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I like the normal, what I consider normal, but people will tell you there's no such thing as normal anymore. So what are we to think? You know, the Galactic Federation is coming to save us. The whole world is going to go into a metamorphosis into some fifth dimension. We're all powerful wizards and gods ourselves. How big of a deception do we have going on? Pretty huge, it seems. Anyways, back to the book. Throw my 2 cents in there. The precepts of Jehovah would be despised and set at naught. Millions in bondage to sin. Millions in bondage to sin. Slaves of Satan, doomed to suffer the second death, would refuse to listen to the words of truth in the day of their visitation. Terrible blindness, strange infatuation. 2 days before the Passover, when Christ had for the last time departed from the temple, after denouncing the hypocrisy of the Jewish rulers, he again went out to his disciples on the Mount of Olives and seated himself with them upon the grassy slope overlooking the city. Once more he gazed upon the walls, its towers, and its palaces. Once more he beheld the temple in the dazzling splendor, a diadem of beauty crowning a sacred mount. So this is a sacred mount. We can't deny that Christianity is a huge portion of the world. The Islamic religion is a huge portion of the world. And both the Islamic peoples and the Christians have been under attack for quite a while. World War I, World War II, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, and so many more, assassination of presidents. And like I said, right now they're burning the American embassy in Honduras. Ships and spies are in Venezuela. They're sending a fleet of ships off the coast of Iran. All of this in fulfillment of the prophecies. I think you can probably find this book online. Not too much money probably on abebooks.com. 1,000 years before the psalmist had magnified God's favor to Israel in making her holy house his dwelling place, and Salem also is his tabernacle, and his dwelling place in Zion. So Jerusalem. So I always thought that was interesting about the word Salem and Jerusalem. I guess that's like adding Jehovah to Salem, Jerusalem. He chose the tribe of Judah, the Mount Zion which he loved, and he built his sanctuary like high palaces. Psalms 26.2, 78.68, and 69. The first temples had been erected during the most preposterous period of Israel's history. The first temple had been erected during the most preposterous period of Israel's history. Vast stores of treasure for this purpose had been collected by King David, and the plans for its construction were made by divine inspiration. Chronicles 1, 28.12, 19. Solomon, the wisest of Israel's monarchs, had completed the work. This temple was the most magnificent building which the world ever saw. Yet the Lord had declared by the prophet Haggai concerning the second temple, the glory of this latter house shall be greater than that of the former. I shall shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill this house with glory, saith the Lord of hosts. That would be the prophet Haggai 2.9 and 7. So after the destruction of the temple by Nebuchadnezzar, it was rebuilt about 500 years before the birth of Christ, and after the first temple was built, by a people who from a lifelong captivity had returned to a wasted and almost desolate country. So 500 years after the first temple was built, the Lord sent King Nebuchadnezzar. You can read this in Jeremiah. You can go watch my 2 videos in the Old Testament. Down into Jerusalem to destroy it, take the people into captivity, those that weren't killed, because they were sacrificing their sons and daughters to the demon god Moloch, Baal, etc. You can read that. So they were in captivity in Babylon for a period of time. And then along came King Cyrus, and he wanted them to go back to Palestine, help them rebuild their ancient temple and civilization. And then of course 500 years later, after they crucified Jesus, and 70 years after that, Titus from Rome and his army destroyed the temple again. And the Jewish people have been dispersed all over the planet for 2,000 years, going from country to country, being exiled, banished, and even massacred because of their Kabbalistic, demonized rituals, sacrifice even children, and all of this stuff, ritual murder, and apparently ritual sex, and so much more. So they were incompatible with the Christian teachings and philosophies. But countries were always compassionate that didn't have Jews, so they would let them in. But then when they got the Jews, it became a sad situation. And so they had to exile them in Spain, in Britain, in France, and 90 or 100 other countries over 2,000 years. But make no mistake about it, it's taken them the last 300 years to get it all back, and they're about to rebuild King Solomon's temple again so they can start sacrificing animals. And bring this cloud of glory, this being who shows up in a cloud, back. Now comes a really interesting part of this story I promised in the beginning. There were among them aged men who had seen the glory of Solomon's temple. So when they rebuilt the second temple, I guess it wasn't more than a man's lifetime, because some of the older men remembered the old temple. So maybe 60, 70 years. Who wept at the foundation of the new building, that it must be so inferior to the former. The feeling that prevailed is forcibly described by the prophet. Who is left among you that saw this house in her first glory? And how do you see it now? Is it not in your eyes, in comparison of it as nothing? Haggai 2.3, Urza 3.12. There was given the promise that the glory of this latter house should be greater than the former. So the Lord promised that the second King Solomon's temple should be greater than the former. Think about this. In the first one, the cloud of glory came. Something else came too. We'll get to it in a minute. And the people grew in power and then rejected God, and he had the temple destroyed. But in the second one, Haggai prophesies the glory of the second temple will be greater. So 500 years after they rebuild the second one is when Jesus Christ was born, the Son of God himself, who used to sit on the temple steps and take lessons from the rabbis and Pharisees and priests, whatever you call them. And they were amazed at the young the boy Jesus's intelligence and awareness. So the greater glory came as prophesied with Jesus. Because apparently, as I'm going to read next, the cloud of glory and the Shekinah did not arrive. But what did arrive? The Savior himself. And even Jesus is recognized as a huge prophet in the Islamic people's religion, in the Quran. So you're talking 50-60% of the world. And in the end times, the whole world is supposed to be notified. And I think with the internet and everything else that's been going on, and knowing that God in his infinite wisdom knows how to take care of these things, everybody will be so informed during the end times. And with the arrival of an Antichrist, people will have to ask questions. And hence, even people like me making videos and other people, I'm not so special. There are many people making great videos and have written many books, including this one. And that's why I decided to do what I did instead of trying to write a book or continue with my company in Florida and just make a lot of money, because I could see that the world was on a spiral downward. Even though everybody thinks they're doing fine and they got a new pool and a new house, and well, we're living on the edge. What's that song? Living on the edge? Waiting on the world to change? And you can see it. I mean, all they have to do is say that there's a nuclear bomb in some semi-tractor trailer, and they'll cease all traffic in the country. Food will run out in a day or two. They can have an EMP, as they have warned us. The electric grid could go down. They could crash the stock market. They could have actually an invasion, World War III. They've already demonized America. It wouldn't be hard to convince countries like China or Russia to attack us. If you look at the pictures of the gay pride parades and everything else in our city streets, they must think we're demons. Is somebody doing that intentionally? I think so. They're burning the embassy, the U.S. embassy in Honduras right now. How much hatred can they stir up in the whole world against us? Who will pity us when they invade the United States and destroy it, as Benjamin Netanyahu said in Fink's Bar? Please go look up what Benjamin Netanyahu said in Fink's Bar. And who controls America? Go look up what Prime Minister Sharon said in a heated argument in his Congress. We control America, and the Americans know it. And we're supposed to be sacrificed. Even Benjamin Netanyahu said that in Fink's Bar. Please go look it up. Don't believe me. And so much more. But let me read this last paragraph, and it'll blow you away. So there was a promise given that the second temple would have a greater than the former. And what could be greater than Jesus himself being born, teaching for 3 years, being crucified, and promised to return after the end times, 2,000 years, whenever it was, and the arrival of the Antichrist and people being made to swear allegiance to this being and deny Jesus, and the destruction of the world. I think it's worth thinking about and being concerned about. But the second temple had not equaled the first in magnificence, nor was it hallowed by those visible tokens of the divine presence which pertain to the first temple. There was no manifestation of the supernatural power to mark its dedication. No cloud of glory was to be seen the newly erected sanctuary. So when they rebuilt the second temple and they were sacrificing the lambs or the cattle or whatever, the cloud of glory did not show up. No fire was seen to no fire from heaven descended to consume the sacrifice on the altar. So apparently on the first temple, fire from sky descended and consumed the sacrificed lamb. That's just unimaginable. What do we know about the Jewish religion? The Shekinah no longer abode between the cherubim. That would be the Ark of the Covenant that the Jews took into battle 3,000 years ago. And when they opened the Ark of the Covenant, if you've seen the Indiana Jones movie, the spiritual entity came out and kills everybody. It says here, no Shekinah. I guess that's what that entity is called, a Shekinah, or a being. No longer abode between the cherubim in the most holy place. So when they sacrificed a sheep, a lamb, whatever, the beam of fire coming from sky to consume the lamb did not happen in the second temple. But I guess because it's describing it here, it did happen on the first one. No cloud of glory, no cloud came and hovered on the second temple like it did on the first one. No Shekinah, no being was inside the Ark of the Covenant on the second one like there was in the first one when they took the Ark of the Covenant into battle everywhere and destroyed their enemies. The Ark, the mercy seat, and the tablets of testimony were not to be found therein. They didn't have the 2 Ten Commandment tablets. The 2 tablets, the 10 Commandments. And we know now, if you've been paying attention, they got this statue of the devil, Baphomet, that they put up in the state building in Oklahoma because they had the 2 tablets on display. So it's this competing religion. So they put the the statue of Baphomet with 2 children looking up admiring the devil. Well, anyways, the citizens weren't going to have that, so they moved it to Detroit. I've showed pictures. You can look up the statue of Baphomet, the devil in Detroit, and see what the people look like and everything. And then they're moving it to Arkansas, again, to another state building with the 10 Commandments on display. So you can see what they're saying. If you can put the 10 Commandments, we can put this here. We want fair and balanced. So the second temple didn't have the super powerful being, the Shekinah, didn't have the cloud of glory, didn't have the fiery beam that came down from heaven to consume the lamb. And get this, no voice sounded from heaven to make known the inquiring priest the will of Jehovah. So in the second temple, there wasn't this, when they had this sacrifice ritual and the cloud of glory showed up and a beam of fire came down and consumed the lamb. They also didn't have, I am your God and here's what I want you to do. They didn't have the voice from heaven on the second temple. But 500 years after it was built the second time, they did get the greatest gift of all that was prophesied here, Jesus, the Son of God. And they rejected him again. He accused them in the Bible, ye are the killers of your prophets. They crucified him. So now, you see what I'm saying? They were dispersed. The first temple was destroyed. They were taken into captivity for a human lifetime, 60, 70 years. Then they rebuilt the second temple. That lasted 500 years, and the Savior was sent because they were still rejecting God. And this time, they weren't taken into captivity or people without a country for 60, 70 years. It was 2,000 years. And now we're getting ready to build the third temple, and they want to start sacrificing the lamb and sheep again. So my point is, if on the first temple they had the Shekinah, this energy inside the Ark of the Covenant that could come out and all-powerful. They had the fiery beam come down from heaven to consume the Lamb. They had the voice from heaven speaking. And recently in the Catholic Church, where the previous Ratzinger Pope stepped down, and Pope Francis was put on the Vatican as the Pope, lightning struck the pinnacle of one of the buildings of the Vatican. So apparently we're having these symbols. So what I did is I did go to a Yahoo image site, and I looked up the Shekinah. I didn't know the Shekinah even existed, even after all this research. I've been trying to understand the Jewish religion and their purposes for sacrificing on the temple. And while they were dispersed for 2,000 years, apparently they've turned towards the dark side, satanic forces, witchcraft forces, and they've been sacrificing humans. So they went from the God of glory to the fallen angel, Lucifer, Satan, and his gang. So this cosmic battle's going on. As the book says, the great controversy. And I've only read a couple pages here. So please go find this book. I could probably make 50 two-hour videos and still not touch what's in this book. But watch this short clip about this thing called the Shekinah, and the voice from heaven, and the cloud of glory. And they're wanting to rebuild the third temple. So what are we going to get then? If the first temple, we got the cloud of glory. We got the Shekinah, the being in the Ark of the Covenant. We got the big flame coming down from the sky consuming the Lamb. In the second temple, we didn't get that, but we got Jesus. So the third temple, what are we going to get? What do they expect to get? And they're over there consuming all of the water from the Sea of Galilee. They made all kinds of water canals, and they're just sucking the Sea of Galilee dry. And they're not allowing the Palestinian people to have any water. And they have waterfalls and opulence. And I was watching a video where they were talking about all this. I showed it in a previous video. And the Jewish man says, I am Israeli. I can do whatever I want. And they all laughed. So the arrogance of the first temple, which got them destroyed, is the same arrogance of the second temple, which got them destroyed, which appears to be the same arrogance they have now. And apparently they're trying to drag everybody into this satanic religion. Some of us are going to reject it. And that's part of the prophecy. And even if you check on to the passage of Noahide laws, where they will exclaim and declare that Jesus was not the Messiah, even though we have all this evidence. And anybody who believes in this false Messiah is a heretic, will be accused of heresy, worshiping a false Messiah, punishable by beheading. And if you find that crazy enough, go look up that the United States purchased 30,000 guillotines. And a year or so ago, some extra blades for the guillotines from Mexico. And they were trying to keep all that confidential. Building of all these FEMA camps and all kinds of facilities and facial recognition systems, microchipping people, computers, AI, watching all of us, documenting everything. Sending a fleet of ships off the coast of Iran right now. The bombers in Venezuela, burning the embassy in Honduras right now. There's no shortage of what I could say right now. But watch this clip, and thank you for watching my video. Rick Miracle reporting. Leave a comment below. Give it a thumbs up. Send the video to other people. Just trying to figure out WTH. What the heck is going on? Hello and welcome to another word search on the Yahoo image site. Actually, 2 words. I was reading the book, The Great Controversy, Unseen Powers Struggle for Supremacy by Ellen White. And it mentions the Ark of the Covenant, and apparently some entity did not appear when they rebuilt King Solomon's temple the second time. And I mentioned this May 30th, 2019, because plainly Israel, the Jewish people, the Zionists, the Shehendrin, the religious authorities, are working towards rebuilding King Solomon's temple the third time. Part of biblical prophecy, FYI. And involved in the biblical prophecy is when the King Solomon's temple is built for the third time, there's supposed to be an arrival of an Antichrist character. And with that comes World War III, Armageddon, and then the second coming of Christ. But anyways, I was reading the book, The Great Controversy, by Ellen White. In 1884, she wrote the book. And it's been quite a controversial book. I'm making a video on it. But there was this one paragraph that blew me away. I'll read from the book, The Great Controversy. But the second temple had not equaled the first in magnificence, nor was it hallowed by those visible tokens of the divine presence which pertain to the first temple. So the second temple, when they performed their sacrifices, apparently the divine entity, God, if you want to call it God, the God of Israel, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the King Solomon's temple, apparently it was not visited by those divine presences. There were no manifestations of supernatural power to mark its dedication. So no manifestations of supernatural power. No cloud of glory was seen to fill the newly erected sanctuary. So a cloud of glory. Apparently when they were doing these sacrificial rituals, this cloud would appear in the temple and hover over it, the cloud of glory. And no fire from heaven descended to consume the sacrifice upon the altar. So apparently, no lightning came from heaven or fire came from heaven to consume the sacrifice on the altar. So literally, a fire came from heaven to consume the sacrifice. And they want to rebuild King Solomon's temple. And in December 2018, they did consecrate and had an altar that's prepared for the third King Solomon's temple. And they had a sacrifice ritual. There's videos on YouTube. You can go watch it. I've talked about it. But here's the part that really got me. The Shekinah no longer abode between the cherubim in the most holy place. The ark and the mercy seat and the tablets of the testimony were not to be found therein. So they didn't have the two tablets, the Ten Commandments. And apparently the Shekinah no longer abode between the cherubim. That would be the Ark of the Covenant with the two cherubim that sits on top. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones movie where they open the Ark of the Covenant and some kind of spiritual entity or entities come flying out and kills everybody. And historically in the Bible, the Hebrews would take the Ark of the Covenant into battle and open the lid, and whatever came out of the Ark of the Covenant would destroy their enemies. But it says here on the second temple, the Shekinah no longer abode. So I guess the Shekinah wasn't there when they opened the Ark of the Covenant. The beings or fire coming from it that would consume their enemies did not appear. This will be on the second temple. And clearly we know, if we're paying attention to the news, the Hebrews, the Jews, the Zionists, Israel, Shahendran, are calling on President Putin and President Donald Trump and world leaders everywhere to support rebuilding King Solomon's temple for the third time. They even have a coin with President Donald Trump's head on it, and the temple, and the Balfour Agreement. So I thought I'd go to a Yahoo image site, and this Shekinah that's supposed to reside in the Ark of the Covenant that did not appear with the second King Solomon's temple looks something like these pictures, maybe? Shekinah glory. If they rebuild King Solomon's temple the third time, will the Shekinah appear? So how many people are aware of this? Fire, lightning from heaven when they have their sacrificial ceremony? What do people know about the religion that is supposed to dominate the world with the rebuilding of King Solomon's temple and the passage of Noahide laws in America and probably other countries, and the sacrifices begin again? Pastor Alexis Wallace begins a powerful message of God's Shekinah glory. This first part focused on the dunamis, power of virtue. So I'm not trying to be blasphemous or blaspheme religion, anybody's religion, but I think it's kind of important to pay attention and to think about what's about to happen with the rebuilding of King Solomon's third temple. And of course, to accomplish all this, they had to bring us World War I, World War II, 9/11. For 300 years, there's been an attack on the world using the secret societies and Masonic organizations, taking over governments, banks. A lot of wars, apparently involving the war between the North and the South in the United States, the Civil War, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, and so much more. So this link is a YouTube video to this picture. Looks like an ominous picture. Shekinah glory exposed the mistress of Elohim. So Elohim, their God, has a mistress. Release the fullness of your spirit. Shekinah glory come. And again, I don't want to ridicule, mock their deity or the demon deities, fallen angels. I'm not trying to bring upon any kind of wrath upon myself or anybody else watching this. So please do this research with a humble attitude. I need more Shekinah Glory ministries. So what is this power that they're trying to bring back? Remember when the previous Pope stepped down and the new Pope was put in place, Pope Francis, and lightning struck the Vatican? Was that some kind of signal from the heavens, the Shekinah? So if they rebuild King Solomon's temple, they sacrifice a lamb, they do their rituals, they control the world, will this be the power behind it? Let your faith be like a shield. You will be able to stop the flaming arrows of the evil one. Oh my. Let your faith be like a shield. You will be able to stop the flaming arrows of the evil one. So is the evil one the entity that is invoked or brought into this world with these ceremonies? Everyone will see the Lord someday in all its splendor, majesty, and Shekinah glory, and all will fall down before him and bend the knee. So what is this power? You can go on Yahoo image site, look at these pictures, click the links, do your own research. But please remember, they are pursuing rebuilding King Solomon's temple. That's a fact. Leaders in Israel said it will happen. Leaders all over the world said it will happen. They had the ceremony with some kind of ritual and the altar, sacrificing a lamb recently. So if they're not going to rebuild the temple, why are they testing the sacrifices on the altar December 2018? Shekinah, the mysterious cloud of God's presence. So again, I ask, why are they trying to destroy Christianity, the Islamic peoples, create a greater Israel, rebuild the temple so they can continue the religious practice of sacrifice to bring about Shekinah? And apparently, when they rebuilt the second temple, the divine presence did not reveal itself like this. And in the book that I've been reading, it also says, no voice sounded from heaven to make known to the inquiring priest the will of Jehovah. So you see them calling the deity Elohim and Jehovah. And here's the 7 candlestick in this picture. Is this the cloud of glory, the fire? Well, it does make one wonder. And Jesus said unto him, except ye see signs and wonders, ye will not believe. Well, I don't need to see signs and wonders. Here's a song. Behold your God, your righteous God, the God of truth and love. So you can go look this song up and sing it. Apparently there's a church here involved in this, Shekinah Ministries. Shekinah glory. The 2 lions, the scales, the cross. Looks like the Ark of the Covenant, the great seal of the church. Oh my, what are we dealing with? What is this when they sacrifice a lamb that comes down from heaven, or the cloud that hovers over it, indicating the presence of God? So it's all serious. They're going to rebuild King Solomon's temple. And it took them World War I, World War II, 9/11 to get to this point. 300 years. Humanity has been manipulated and attacked for them to bring this about. What do you think? Leave a comment. Curious what people think. Did you already know all this? Thanks for watching my short video clip of the Yahoo image site, looking up the Shekinah glory. Quite interesting. Rick Merico reporting.